My hometown of Milton, Florida is located in Santa Rosa County. It is the 17th largest county in Florida, covering 1,173 square miles. It is in the Northwest Panhandle region, not far from Pensacola, and is considered a popular destination for retirees. But then again, isn't all of Florida? Milton also has quite a history. It is the birthplace of Martha Beck, one of the Lonely Hearts Killers, part of a duo serial killer couple, and where she grew up. She met Raymond Fernandez in 1947, and the two started a scheme between 1947 to 1949 to swindle money from widows and single women. None of her crimes ever occurred in Milton, but they began to kill their victims, starting out in New York, and were eventually caught in Michigan in 1949, where they were extradited back to New York, tried for the murder of Janet Faye, found guilty, and sentenced to death. They both were electrocuted at Sing Sing prison in 1951, and her body was shipped back by train to the Milton Cemetery, where she is buried today. I have already covered 2 stories about Martha and Ray, and you can watch from the end video links at the end of this video if that interests you. I hope it does. Recently, with help from a friend and local historian, Richard Wood, he brought it to my attention in case I wanted to cover a local historical and true crime story, and sent me all the material he could to help me cover this very interesting piece. Richard writes a blog about the local history in our town and runs a Facebook page. He is great at finding nearly ancient material and has been of great assistance in helping me tell this story. So I want to not only give him credit for writing about it too, but to thank him as well for referring it to me. A young Russian immigrant and ambitious entrepreneur, around 20 to 21 years of age, named Charles Sudmall, arrived in the United States in the summer of 1895 and signed a declaration to denounce Tsar Nicholas II of Russia to become a citizen of the United States. A passport application around the turn of the century stated that he arrived from Buenos Aires aboard the ship the Angara. Once he made it to the States, his passport indicated that he lived in Boston, Massachusetts, Newport, Rhode Island, Pensacola, Florida, and ultimately the last place he lived in the 16 years he resided in the States, my hometown of Milton, Florida, where he not only made a fortune for himself, but he would also meet his fate here, a murder that has corruption written all over it. Everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're a first-time viewer, I'm happy you found me. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, and click the notifications for new content. Again, welcome, and let's get into the story. The Exchange Hotel is a historic building that sits in the downtown area of Milton and was built in 1914 by the Russian immigrant turned U.S. citizen Charles Sudmall. The structure is located on the Santa Rosa County Courthouse Square and was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. I never knew the story behind it, yet I always felt whatever that story was had to be compelling. After just now learning about the history of the hotel and about Sudmall, it is definitely a riveting true story. When I was growing up, all I knew at the time is that it was rented for office space, but like I said, I always had a hunch there was more to it than that, which there is, so keep following me as I get through some of the details. It was built to house a rural telephone system, and Sudmall also leased the building to H.L. Creary, who opened a first-class hotel there. To articulate how well Sudmall worked as hard as he did to eventually accumulate a vast wealth for himself by the 1920s, I need to back up and tell you a little bit more about his life here in the States after he left Russia, present-day city in Latvia. In 1898, he was living in Pensacola on South Palafox, working as a bayman, which is a person who fishes the bay. It was in Pensacola that Sudmall would eventually become a naturalized citizen. In 1906, he ended up in my hometown of Milton, and his listed occupation was electrician. While living in Milton in 1906, he became the manager of the Milton Telephone Exchange. Later that same year, he and an attorney by the name of Lawrence N. Irvin, who I assume at some point were connected by business relationship or friendship, or both, because the two were having dinner together one evening. Apparently, Sudmall claims that Irvin said he insulted him. However, because Sudmall refused to apologize for whatever reason, he did not believe he said anything to apologize for, and we don't know what exactly was said, only what happened in the end. But Irvin insisted that Sudmall apologize, to which he kept refusing. Sudmall even tried avoiding the confrontation any further by walking away from Irvin and walked to a livery stable. A livery stable is where horses are kept or even lent out for hire. But Irvin followed him and kept demanding an apology. Sudmall tried to distance himself again, and this time he walked to the phone exchange building, went to the second floor balcony and sat down. He had a moment of peace for about half an hour when Irvin burst into his presence and was even more irate, still demanding an apology, and this time, when Sudmall refused, Irvin brandished a knife and slashed at Sudmall twice, cutting him. Sudmall just reacted. He punched Irvin in the face so hard it caused him to fall over the balcony, hitting the ground below, causing a fracture to his skull, and he would die 10 days later. Irvin is buried in Defuniak Springs, here in Florida. After Irvin died, Sudmall was charged with his murder. He was represented by the future Attorney General, General Thomas F. West, and exonerated by Judge Hawley during a hearing that this was merely an accident and self-defense as well. Today, there is an attorney office that sits on the site where this self-defense killing took place and right next to the Exchange Hotel, a few years before the hotel was even built. This is where Charles Sudmall built the Exchange Hotel, and then right across the street, I do not know if this is the exact same building or where the building once stood, but I believe this is the building that Charles Sudmall ended up killing Irvin for not accepting, he wouldn't give his apology to him, and he wouldn't leave him alone, and then Irvin came at him with a knife and cut him twice. So when he punched him, he died somewhere in this area. It's now a law firm. It's still the same area, and it makes sense. It's like he must have walked over here because this was probably another building he owned. By 1918, Charles Sudmall registered for the draft, presenting his occupation as telephone manager. In the 1919 publication, The American Telephone Journal, he is described as the general manager of the Gulf Telephone and Telegraph Company in Milton. He had been in business for 13 years and had 200 subscribers. By the time the Roaring Twenties arrived, Sudmall was a very successful and wealthy businessman. The businesses he owned were the Telegraph Exchange in Milton, along with the Exchange Hotel and another hotel in Florida Town. In addition, he also owned the Mariana Telephone Exchange. Sudmall never married or had any children. He seemed to be a very relentless businessman and focused on that during his time in the United States. One of his business partners in Milton was Grover Cleveland Harvell, although he was known simply as Cleve. Cleve was the son of a former local sheriff, James Harvell. Sudmall and Harvell's business relationship was that they were partners in a garage downtown, located at the corner of Oak and Elmira Streets, which today is just a fenced-off empty lot. Harvell was also an agent for Star Automobiles. So I'm going to take you to the fenced-off lot up here. This is where a garage used to exist, and this is where Charles Sudmall was murdered, and I'm coming up to it now. There's nothing here now but a fenced-off lot, and it's next to the courthouse. This fence right here. And this is just an empty lot now. But in this empty lot, somewhere, possibly over what I don't know. I'm not gonna speculate. I don't know if there's a way to find out, but this is where the garage existed, where Charles Sudmall, who built the Exchange Hotel, was murdered. One morning in 1922, and the last day of Charles Sudmall's life, a conversation was overheard by a Mr. Falk who owned the Santa Rosa Hotel. He was at the garage owned by Harvell and Sudmall that morning to pay a bill, and later testified that he heard Sudmall ask Cleve Harvell if he was going to be busy that day. Although Mr. Falk testified that the conversation seemed friendly, he did say that Harvell responded that he was going to Pensacola but would see him again upon his return. That same day, around 7:20 p.m., Miss Highnote, the night operator at the phone exchange, received a call from Harvell looking for Sudmall, so she transferred the call to the hotel and waited on the line until Sudmall picked up. She heard Harvell tell Sudmall that he had made it back, and Sudmall responded that he would be right down to meet him. But first, he stopped by his office and retrieved something from his desk and put it in his pocket. What that something is unknown. A person by the name of Lily Nelson said she saw him do this 6 to 7 minutes before Sudmall was gunned down inside the garage that he and Harvell ran as a business together. When Sudmall reached the garage, he was gunned down immediately. Today, it is just a minute walk to the empty lot where the garage once stood. Cleve Harvell and Walton C. Rhodes, also referred to as Walter, were the only two people, besides the now deceased Sudmall, in the garage when the shooting occurred. Culver W. Cobb, who was a cashier at the First National Bank in Milton and also a witness to the aftermath of the shooting of Sudmall, later testified that he, Harvell, and H.C. Collins all took that trip to Pensacola earlier that day together, the same day Sudmall was murdered. According to Cobb, Harvell had in his possession a .32 caliber pistol and had fired it from the ferry as they were returning from Pensacola back to Milton. Today, that same area is called Ferry Pass, and roads were eventually built so that one could go from Milton to Pensacola without the use of ferries crossing the bay. Cobb would also go on to testify that it was the same pistol found next to Sudmall's body later that evening when he was gunned down. Cobb said that he and another man were the first to reach the garage after the shooting and were let into the building by Rhodes. Not only did he testify that the pistol he saw laying next to Sudmall's body was the same gun Harvell had possessed that day and fired from the ferry, but that Harvell walked him to the back of the garage and tried to get him to cooperate and basically lie, to say that the gun did not belong to him, but Cobb knew better. Remember, there were two people who Sudmall met up with in that garage that fateful night, Cleve Harvell and Walter Rhodes. When his body was discovered, there were a total of 8 bullet wounds, with 5 in the body, 1 in the leg, and 2 in the arm. It was later said during the case that the bullets found in Sudmall's body came from 2 different guns. The town's undertaker, Luther Fisher, was the one who examined the body of Sudmall later that evening. He testified that Harvell was a close friend and that Harvell admitted to him that both he and Rhodes shot Sudmall. Fisher testified that the killing was planned and premeditated, and that Rhodes was instructed to hide in the shadows in the corner of the garage and wait for Sudmall to enter. Rhodes missed the first 2 shots, but then hit him 3 times. Harvell then took his gun and shot Sudmall 5 more times. Harvell tried blaming it all on Rhodes, saying that Sudmall was his best friend and that he didn't shoot Sudmall. Harvell asked Fisher to lie that night as Fisher was sewing up the bullet holes. He asked him to say there were only 5 bullet wounds when clearly Fisher could see 8 and testified to that in court. Fisher's assistant and owner of the Wolf Funeral Home that would later come to be L. Douglas Wolf testified that while he was preparing Sudmall's body, that Harvell did indeed try and get the undertaker, Luther Fisher, to lie about how many bullets were in his body. Why did he do this? What was the motive to shooting someone Harvell knew for years and was in business with? Well, during the trial, they claimed self-defense, and Rhodes took all the blame for the killing. The state attorney, Thompson's case was that Harvell and Sudmall were business partners. But it was Harvell that called Sudmall over to the garage as Rhodes hid in the dark corner, and that Sudmall was ambushed and shot as he entered the building. 8 bullets entered the body from 2 different kinds of bullets in it, indicating there had to be 2 guns, and since there were 2 people, both Harvell and Rhodes were the culprits. Not to mention, the gun found laying beside Sudmall's body belonged to Harvell. The first trial of Harvell and Rhodes ended in a mistrial. After the mistrial, attorneys for Harvell and Rhodes filed a writ of habeas corpus with the Florida Supreme Court that got the 2 men freed on a $5,000 bail until they were retried. On October 3, 1924, they were retried where Harvell was acquitted and Rhodes' case was found null pros, which is a dismissal, and prosecution was dropped on Rhodes. So both got away with murder, with planned and premeditated first-degree felony murder, and justice for Sudmall was denied. But it gets even worse to think about why these 2 people, maybe even more, this case reeks of conspiracy and corruption, would suddenly want to get rid of their longtime friend and business partner. And for back then, it doesn't surprise me in the least that Harvell and Rhodes were acquitted, even though admissions of guilt were made, and the witness testimony seemed like an open and shut case for justice, but that just didn't happen, and after his death, it got even more telling, especially if you believe in conspiracies, which do and have in fact happened throughout history. The next thing that happens after the trials was what to do with Sudmall's vast estate. It is said he was worth $90,000, worth about $1.5 million today. He also owned a fortune in automobiles, 7 of them. It is said when his estate sold off, no one knows what happened to those cars or who they were sold to, so that is a mystery. In 1923, the former state's attorney, now county judge, H.W. Thompson, appointed Culver W. Cobb, the same man that testified for the defense during the Harvell trial, as curator of Sudmall's estate, instead of Sudmall's family back home. He still had a father that was alive, Carl Sudmall. Sudmall's last will and testament had been written and witnessed in May of 1910, and the original executor that Sudmall requested passed away, so the vacancy was filled and appointed to Cobb. After the death of Sudmall, the West Florida Telephone and Telegraph Company met in Marianna, Florida, and selected a new president, Peter L. Rosasco, who was also the uncle to a well-known politician here in the 70s, 80s era, Bill Rosasco, who eventually acquired the Exchange Hotel and turned it into office spaces and a B&B in 1989. He died in 2002. But Peter Rosasco eventually was even made administrator of Sudmall's estate. So, how did he get it from Cobb? Was he forced? I don't know. At the same time this was happening for Peter Rosasco, R.A. McGreechy was made director of the West Florida Telephone Company and was also a Milton attorney. After Peter Rosasco became in charge of Sudmall's estate, in October of 1927, Arthur B. Lowell, Solicitor General of Latvia, and on behalf of the Sudmall surviving family, requested Rosasco be removed from his role as administrator to Sudmall's estate, and the request was granted by Judge McLeod. Arthur Lowell was acting at the request of Sudmall's father, Carl, who actually made his way from Russia to Milton to inquire about his late son's estate. Carl was charging them with a misappropriation or misapplication of funds, and Rosasco was removed on October 22, 1927. Richard makes a good point in writing in his blog entry about what he thinks of this case, and I completely agree with him when he says, "What a tangled web it was. I believe that there was a plot to do away with this foreigner who had become successful in this country and divided his wealth. Of course, a jury in Santa Rosa County was going to acquit a well-known local boy of killing someone from Russia. I myself believe this case is about murder and corruption. I mean, think about it. Even Harvell himself was the son of the one-time sheriff." For new content and breaking news stories, please be sure to click the notifications to follow along and be notified when updates are available. Don't forget to like, comment, and please feel free to share. You can also join my Facebook group for True Crime and History Time and follow me on TikTok and Instagram. My usernames for those platforms are @JeriScarborough Official. And as always, thank you for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel.